Victim identification. The next slide. The process of identification is aimed at determining who an individual, whether is a victim of trafficking, according to the definition of trafficking in the United Nations Protocol. This presentation is somehow streamlined from the IOM perspective, so it's kind of a little bit different. Now, the UN has a definition of what trafficking in persons is. We all know what that is, the Palermo Protocol. And that has been domesticated thanks to NAPTIP. I think Section 82 has defined what trafficking is. Edo State Task Force has also taken it a step further and defined it in their law, Section 13. Trafficking, basically what those two laws say, and in tandem with what the Palermo Protocol says, is trafficking is any act involved in the recruitment, transfer, harbor, receipt of persons by means of deceit, coercion, force, for the purpose of exploitation. Exploitation which could be sexual, domestic, or for servitude. Why did I define that? I'm defining that to let you know that once we have gotten the definition of trafficking, to know that there is an act, there is a means, and there is a purpose, when you have that background, it's very easy now to know who would be a victim. If that person passes through those acts, that means, and for that purpose, of course, the conclusion would definitely be that the person is a victim of trafficking. So this presentation, at the end of the day, I hope that participants will be able to identify victims of trafficking, will be able to know what the challenges are in identifying victims of trafficking. We're also going to look at the identification and screening processes and the principles to apply when we are conversing with victims of trafficking. So why do we need to identify a victim of trafficking? They are, about the next slide, that's slide 3. There are basically 3 reasons why we need to identify them. The first is humanitarian duty. You know, we owe them a duty as humans, and until we identify them, we can't help them. The other is a legal duty. Thankfully, when the survivors gave their testimony today, you will agree with me that there is a legal duty that can span off from a victim of trafficking, which basically is giving the person access to justice, because they've suffered a lot. They have gone through traumatic experience, and it's only through the instrumentality of the law that they can get redress. And the last part is for investigative opportunity. These victims of trafficking are actually a repertoire of evidence. Let me just expand a little bit. I have a background in prosecution. I used to be a prosecutor for over 10 years before I joined the UN. Now, the thing with human trafficking is pretty very different from other crimes. Trafficking is a crime, as it were, against the person. In human trafficking, the thing is that the evidence lies in the person. It's very different from drug. If you arrest a drug suspect, they give you a form to fill, and they have probably cocaine or whatever that the person was trying to carry. Once you see the cocaine, it's almost clear that this is the cocaine he carried. If it's robbery and he was caught with probably arms, you see the firearms and everything, it's clear. But in trafficking, it's pretty different, because the evidence that you need, the key evidence that you need, is the human being himself. And you are doing it, human beings are dynamic. They can change at any time. So then we had situations where, in my prosecutorial days, you will see the person who is a victim, but the person after some time is giving a different story, because the traffickers are trying to interfere with the person. It's trying to compromise the person, and issues like I've forgiven them, I've left everything for God, and I've put it behind me. Those kind of things come. And you know, in criminal trials, you must prove your case beyond reasonable doubt. And any doubt, the court will always resolve it in favor of the accused person. So most times, when they compromise the victim, the case is as good as dead. So that's for that as for investigative opportunities, because the victim carries a lot of information. Then what have we noticed? Why is it difficult to identify a victim of trafficking? One of the things that makes it difficult is that, one, some of them are willing to disclose. They are willing to talk about that experience for very many reasons. Reasons of stigmatization, reasons of some level of privacy. Just imagine yourself as you are now. We are all mature here. If I call you and ask you, I said, you slept with a woman or you slept with a man, come and explain how it was. You will not naturally feel comfortable to say such things. So imagine yourself too, for a victim of trafficking who was exploited sexually, might not be in a position to say things. And don't forget, like we know, victims of trafficking, a lot of them have gone through traumatic experience. Ruth had made mention, some of them, particularly those that went to the Libya route, they have seen very, very dehumanizing things. I once had an encounter with a victim that came for training. I noticed the guy was very, very aggressive, extremely aggressive, and he comes with a clutch. So they were in a line one day, they were for food, and somebody stayed in his front. The guy didn't take it like this. Ordinarily, someone should not react to that extent. But I later found out that in Libya, what happened was that in this their camp, one of the Arab person was trying to rape a girl in his presence, and just out of that good nature of showing kind of resistance, the Arab guy shot him on the leg without asking a question. That's how he lost that leg. So his actions are quite different. I'm only saying that to say that victims of trafficking may not open up. So we have difficulties in identifying them. Some of them too are unaware of the assistance, and we've seen that a lot. Like I told you, IOM has a lot of assistance, but some people are not really not aware. When we interface with them, even at the point of arrival, some don't even tell you that they are victims of trafficking, much later. And we know that trauma has a role it plays in such things, why they don't want to open up. Some have a feeling of guilt and shame because of the exploitative situation that they've gone to. And some too are afraid of deportation. I'm talking generally now. Like I told you, this presentation is coming from a UN perspective. So trafficking is a global phenomenon. I'm not just talking about Nigeria. This presentation was structured in a way that looks into different areas of trafficking and different manifestations across. Now, by identifying victims of trafficking, why is it key for us to identify them? It's key because it's only when you can identify them that you can profile solutions. One of the things that we can help with that is inform them of their rights and assistance to empowerment programs, things that they can get, and refer them to responsible agencies. Now, there are a lot of NGOs, there are a lot of government structure. For example, like the tax force is there, NATIP is there. Even traditionally, thanks to the royal father of IOM, he has a foundation that is also into empowerment of traffic victims. If you don't identify them, if you don't know them, how would you refer them to such opportunities? How will you refer them to such places? We have lots of synergies that we've now put in place, working with stakeholders, and I'm glad to announce to you because here is a platform so that we can direct traffic victims to where they can get help. We had put up a legal hub last year, 2020. PJI is a member of that hub, Edo State Ministry of Justice, NATIC, and series of other NGOs. That hub is created to provide access to justice, legal information. If a victim of trafficking comes and, for example, needs services, she can identify her trafficker. Oh, this man XYZ trafficked me to Libya. The hub is there. It's domiciled in Edo State Ministry of Justice at Sample Road, Federal Secretariat. The actors there, if it's a criminal matter, yes, nothing can take over. Edo State Task Force can take over. If it's a matter that has to do with civil rights, you want to sue the person and get money back because he exploited you. Legal hub, MPA, leader, and the likes, they're all members of this hub. Information is very key. Like I said, when I answered the question, if you don't disclose to a doctor, he can't really do much for you. You must tell him the symptoms that you feel for him to be able to prescribe what your medications and your treatment will be. Then, just to have a feel of what it might be to probably be in a shoe of a victim or a survivor, as we now call them. Imagine you relocate to an environment and everybody around you speaks a different language. You're just the only person there. You don't even know what and what is in that environment. Then imagine a scenario too, as a victim of trafficking, you see your trafficker or the person that abused you is mingling with police with uniforms, just like what that lady said, the survivor said, that they made a call and surprisingly, the number was already recorded in the man's phone. And it was like they had more like a business partner. Of course, you will lose confidence in that whole process. So I'm only bringing these scenarios to draw our minds home to what it might just feel like to be a victim of trafficking. Imagine you have a debt of $30,000 and above. Then we're going to the identification and screening process. This is really the meat of the matter. How do we identify them? How do we screen them? Don't forget, this is more like a UN perspective. But I'll try as much as possible to drive it home to the everyday things that we see here. Now, we have an assessment of some indicators. How do we identify them? There are some things that give green lights or red lights to make you know that when you see XYZ, your mind should go towards the fact that this person might just be a victim of trafficking. So, what are the things that we can look at as indicators? One is, maybe you come across a person who is telling you a story that his documents were seized when he traveled. You know, trafficking, just to expand, can be internal and can be external. Although we are more conversant with the external, but there is an internal trafficking, and it is still going in very great dimensions. So one of the indicators can be, he's telling you a story that his documents were seized, and it's very typical with the proper trafficking scenario cases. Girls, boys, the trafficker seizes their documents. He does that because he wants to have control over them, so that they can do whatever he wants them to do. Another indicator can be injuries. A lot of them undergo very dehumanizing conditions. Traffickers are beating them. In my days as a prosecutor, I had, because some of them are my witnesses I will take in court. So because of that, they will tell you your story, they will tell you their story over and over again. There was this case I did. The lady was working, her mother worked in the palace of the king. It's in the eastern region, I won't call the king's name. And the mom worked in the palace. So the king's son met this girl who was just barely 16. I said, oh, your mother is very nice, this, that. I want to help you. You know, that's the way traffickers always come. It comes like the word help. I want to help you. Your results, you are doing very well in school. I want to, in short, you will go to school abroad. The girl is happy. Okay. So, the girl is so happy because this so-called prince wants to help her. He said, I will send you abroad. Go and snap passport. And in her naivety, brought normal size passport. So that we use to process your paper. But you know what? This paper, they will do it in Lagos. The girl arranged from Esan, wherever they were, traveled to Lagos. And she was keep asking that, hope is the flight I will use. He said his flight, the aeroplane is in Lagos. Got to Lagos, and the story changed. Oh, you just missed the flight. We will catch another one, but we'll go to Abuja. Cut long story short, she went to Abuja, but in that joy of I'm leaving Nigeria, I'm leaving, the guy took her to Libya. And when she got to Libya, it's like no coming back. The first baptism, according to her, was gangrene for about 5 people, just to dehumanize her. Because he told her that she's going to prostitute. She said, no, over her dead body, you can't do that kind of thing. I said, okay, you think I'm playing with you? That. And don't forget, trafficking, most times, from recent things that we're seeing now, they are linked to cult groups, called gangs. So she was dehumanized just to break the resistance. More like there's nothing left again. So that was how she was introduced to prostitution. This was the case I was doing. The funny thing about that case, when the girl was brought back, thanks to NAPSIP and their collaborations with the foreign embassies, we instituted the case. To my greatest surprise, her senior brother came to see me in the office. What was he saying? That as a family we have met, we think what has passed has passed. Let past tense be past tense. We are all one. He's our king's son. Those kind of talk. Let us drop the case. And I asked the girl, but the girl was very mad that never, with what I passed through, I will never drop this case. So I'm only just saying that to let us know that sometimes injuries, sometimes bodily scars can give you hints that that person may have been a victim of trafficking. Movement restriction. If you ask the person just in normal conversation, okay, when you traveled or where you were you able to move around and see your friends and do things, or the person will tell you, no, I'm in one place? That should also give you a hint. There are various levels of indication, very many. So this paper cannot cover all, but it's just to open our eyes so that when you see things like that, sometimes it may be them traveling in a group. You see 3 people going of the same age, and when you ask question, one seems to be the one answer on behalf of the 3. That should just turn your mind that this might be a victim of trafficking. Some years ago, while I still worked in, I have a background, I used to work in that thing. There was a lady, just normal day, she entered Big Joe. And there were these girls that entered the Big Joe with one guy, but they didn't sit down in the same place. They spread themselves. The guy was at the back while she was there. But because of the training, she sensed something, because even when they are to write their name or manifest, it's this guy that does everything for them, and they're just there, and sometimes you see them with a small bag. Somebody that is traveling out of the country. You know normally how you do when you are traveling, your luggages are many. But if somebody traveling in the country, it just has like 2 bags. Your mind should read that it can be a trafficking scenario. That story was that because of the psyche, she don't see that there's something fishy about it. Each time this guy is the one always answering questions, always the one telling them, although they didn't sit down together and they're of the same age. When you ask her, maybe you want to gist with the person, he doesn't allow that kind of thing. She now highlighted, so they were intercepted. And when they were intercepted, they separated them. All the facts and questions pointed to that guy, who just sat down quietly. So that was how he was arrested. I'm only saying that there are a lot of indicators that when we come across can drive our mind that this may just be a victim of trafficking. Okay. There's the sexual exploitation. You know, trafficking, by the way it is defined, have 3 components. There's the act of it, there is the means, and there's the traffic, and there's the purpose. When these 3 things add up together, it means there is a trafficking scenario. Most of the times, particularly with this region that we are, the Edo State and the rest, the exploitation is more for sexual exploitation. But there are other levels of exploitation. Some are trafficked for labor exploitation. While I still worked for government, I had exposure to work in different parts of the country. And I noticed, I worked in the East for a few years. The level of trafficking there and the types, in Edo State, I was conversant. Most of the cases that I was coming across was, we traveled to Italy, we traveled to Spain, XYZ, we were exploited sexually. Those were the major cases that came across. But when I went to the East, the dynamic changed. It wasn't much of, I traveled for sex. It was more of baby sales, which is also a form of trafficking. It was more of servitude. There was one particular pathetic one. This woman had a nanny, and the woman is a banker. Now, this nanny, when she leaves in the morning, she's like a single mother, leaves and we trusted with this nanny. The nanny will take the baby out for begging. Some will beat the child, beat the child. You know, that the exploitation is the begging. You get the point. She collects money from that baby. As she has like series of them, she will gather them and hold them and stand. But the mother noticed each time she came back, the baby is always tired, sleeping, tired. She can't understand. They are feeling he's tired. Not knowing that this was what was happening until it now burst. And somebody had said, "Oh, I saw it's like I saw your child on Ogui Road. No, if I never put my child." Cut long story short, that was how this man was arrested. I'm only saying that to say there are different dynamics when you identify and when you screen. What do you do? Now, there are some that at the initial contact with the VoT, it's just clear that this is a traffic victim. Either the person is telling you of, or the person looks and tells you of experiences of rape and things like that. It's so clear. But there are some that are not too clear. You now need to ask questions. That's where the screening comes in. You know, IOM, we have developed some screening tools. For example, just like this COVID, if you go to hospital, there are some series of questions. There are screening tools. Once they ask you X, B, C, D, and the answer to A, B, C, D is pointing like this. For example, in the last, have you been sneezing? Do you feel this? Do you feel that? Do you have constant headache? If all these answers sum up, it's more likely the person might have COVID. Same thing too in trafficking. There are some questions that we developed that when we ask A, B, C, D, E, and the answers tally like this, we can safely conclude that it's trafficking because those questions are tilted around those three principles: the act of trafficking, which is, like I told you in the definition, the recruitment, harbor, receipt, transfer, XYZ, the means. Sorry. Okay, but my glasses is not on, that's the problem. So I can't really see you from that distance. Yes. Okay, so when we have those indicators clearly, it's very easy to know once it passes the act, the means, and the purpose, we know that it's a trafficking scenario. Now, when you are interviewing a trafficking person, this is where the protection issues come about. Having known that this is a victim of trafficking, what are those things that you must ensure you guide it? One is confidentiality. Somebody telling you very deep secrets. Yes, I just have 5 minutes, so let's jump to the slides of the principles. Confidentiality is a great principle, one of the principles. Telling you some deep things. You know, what I've discovered, they may not tell you, and that lady said it, they may not open up the first day, but over time, they start opening up. I had some experience there. This victim will come, you ask her all the questions on heaven and earth, we'll just be giving you one syllable answer, no, yes, shake head, nod. You just keep wondering. But thankfully, nothing now found out that the lady went to swear before. So that swear that she swore, that oath, is what is making her not open up. So they got the native doctor when she did that oath to revoke the oath and to let her know that, oh, she's free. Will you believe it? That girl began to sing like a bird, trying to explain who the trafficker was, what he did, X, Y, Z. And what we did those days is we even used the native doctor as a prosecution witness. And when you do that, you get a lot of results. So, another principle is do no harm. What does that basically mean? The person has suffered some trauma, has suffered some harm before. Don't use your own questions to further add salt to injury. E.g., the person is telling you he traveled, you will now ask a follow-up question like that. So, with everything here, why you still go? You know, they hear say people they die for that, why you still go? Doesn't make any sense. You don't have to ask that question. It's doing more harm than good. I'm saying this because these are practical things that we see every day. Then you must make sure the environment is secure. In closing, I want to talk about that. The person must have confidence that the place is secure, that the telling you is also secure, and that, particularly if it's going to tilt to prosecution, because you know people are very scared of court and some of the repercussions. Sometimes it goes wrong. Sometimes the traffickers even go to the extent of wanting to put pressure on the family. More like, okay, you're the one that carries me, the one that is police arrest me, I will deal with you. So you must give assurances of the person that you are safe and you are secure as much as you can and within what the law can permit. Let's go to the last part, which is to say thank you very much for your time, for listening. I don't know if you have questions. I had rushed up all the things I needed to say, but I think 2 questions, we can't throw more light specifically on some areas. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you so much, Ambassador.